The moment before the fall is never loud. I've seen this moment many times, not in the crash, but in the decisions that came before it. My name is Edmund Hale. This is Before the Fall Chronicle. At the beginning, nothing demanded attention. There was no dramatic shift, no visible disruption, and no clear signal that something was changing. The environment felt familiar, stable, and largely predictable. Recent outcomes reinforced that feeling. Decisions made in the past had worked, expectations had been met, and results fell within acceptable boundaries. Nothing stood out as dangerous. Nothing felt urgent. This was not a moment of excitement. It was a moment of routine. Processes continued as they always had. Methods that were once questioned were now trusted. Judgment was shaped by repetition rather than scrutiny. Experience did not feel like a variable. It felt like protection. And because nothing appeared broken, nothing needed fixing. Attention moved forward without resistance, carried by habit rather than intent. This is how patterns quietly establish themselves, not through sudden change, but through repetition, not through force, but through familiarity. Long before consequences appear, the structure is already in place. At the time, nothing felt unusual. There was no tension in the air, no sense of urgency, and no reason to slow down. The numbers made sense. They had made sense before. The trend was familiar, behaving the way it was expected to behave. Small deviations appeared, but they corrected themselves quickly. This was not chaos. This was order. Decisions were not impulsive. They were explained, measured, and supported by logic, data, and recent outcomes. Every question had an answer. Every concern had a justification. Every hesitation was reframed as unnecessary caution. What created the greatest sense of comfort was not confidence, but consistency. Day after day, the same approach produced acceptable results. Not extraordinary, not perfect, acceptable. And over time, acceptable became reliable. Reliable became expected, and expectation slowly replaced observation. Without anyone noticing, the process stopped being reviewed and started being assumed. The assumption was never spoken aloud. It never needed to be. That tomorrow would behave like yesterday. That familiar patterns would remain intact. That experience had already accounted for risk. Adjustments were no longer necessary, questions no longer urgent, alternatives no longer explored, not because they were impossible, but because they felt unnecessary. This is where most failures quietly begin, not with excess, not with recklessness, and not with greed, but with the belief that nothing needed to change. What makes this moment difficult to recognize is not a lack of information. It is the absence of discomfort. When everything appears to function as expected, there is no pressure to reassess, no reason to slow down, and no incentive to question what already works. The mind prefers continuity. It rewards familiarity and avoids interruption, and so attention narrows. Signals that once mattered are downgraded, reinterpreted, or ignored entirely, not because they disappear, but because they no longer fit the prevailing belief. This is the blind spot. The space between confidence and awareness, between experience and assumption. By the time contradiction becomes impossible to ignore, the decision has already been made. Not suddenly, not emotionally. Quietly, logically, in advance. The fall does not arrive without warning. It arrives after the warning has been explained away.